Welcome. You're listening to Boring History for Sleep, where we wander through the dusty corners of the past not in search of excitement, but in search of rest. Tonight, we set sail, gently, on the quiet currents of history, back to the time of the Roman Empire. Not to the marble halls of emperors or the arenas of gladiators, but to the creaking decks of Roman warships. This journey will not be hurried. You need not stay fully awake. In fact, you're invited to drift in and out, like a ship rocking in calm harbor waters. Let the details wash over you, soothing and slow. Tonight's story is not about conquest, or even glory. It's about the ordinary people who lived and labored in the belly of wooden ships, who rowed without pause, who obeyed orders without question, and who lived at the mercy of sea and empire alike. We'll explore what life was like aboard a Roman warship, from the daily rituals of the rowers to the hierarchy on deck, from forgotten battles to quiet rituals. We'll meet forgotten admirals, explore mysterious maritime technologies, and even visit the bustling port cities that once thrummed with oarsmen's songs. So, get comfortable. Let your thoughts drift like a ship unmoored, and imagine yourself aboard a Roman warship, not as a commander, but as one of the many who toiled in the darkness below the deck. Let's begin. Segment 1. Row or Rot. Life as a Roman galley slave. Imagine yourself waking before the sun, not to the gentle sound of birdsong, but to the barked commands of an overseer. You are not a soldier, you are not a citizen. You are a rower one of hundreds packed tightly into the lower deck of a Roman a sleek warship built for speed and maneuverability. The air is thick with the scent of salt and tar, layered over the lingering musk of unwashed bodies. Light filters in, only through narrow slats above. There is no privacy. There is barely space to stretch. You sleep on the bench where you row. It's worn smooth, polished not by design but by decades of sweat and friction. Your O is your tool, your burden, and your only constant companion. Your day begins before dawn. A thin meal perhaps, a handful of soaked beans, a crust of hard bread offers little comfort. There is no coffee, no tea, no quiet moment to ease into the day. Only orders. When the signal is given a horn, long and low you and your shipmates take your oars. The work begins. Row pause. Row pause. It is not a sprint, it is a rhythm. The same, over and over. The helmsman calls the cadence. The drummer beats it in time. The coxswain watches for lagging effort. You must stay in sync, not only for discipline, but for the survival of the ship. One oar at a time can break the motion. The heat builds quickly. Even in the morning, the closed deck traps warmth and moisture. Your tunic sticks to your back. The wood grows slick beneath your hands. There are rules aboard this ship. Unspoken ones. You do not stop unless ordered. You do not speak out of turn. And you never, ever let go of the oar. Too many. The galley slave is an image of punishment. But not all rowers are criminals. Some are prisoners of war, others indentured by debt. Some were born to this life. All share the same silence, the same aching limbs. Breaks are rare and brief. The sea, after all, does not wait. Sometimes, during longer voyages, the ship rows and shifts butt on campaign. Every arm is needed. You row until your hands blister, and then you row some more. Bandages? Rare. Rest. Only when the commander sees fit. Above deck, the officers stand in sunlight. They breathe the open air. They give orders, receive messages, study the horizon. Below, you hear only muffled voices, footsteps, and the occasional creak of wood straining under pressure. When the ship enters combat, your role becomes even more harrowing. You do not fight. You steer the ship with your own body, by force of will and muscle. In ramming maneuvers, you row full speed toward the enemy, knowing full well you may strike or be struck in, go down with the vessel. If the hull cracks, water will pour in first at your feet. And yet, in the long hours, there is also a strange rhythm, a peace of sorts. The regular beat of oars, the closeness of others, the predictable call and response. In the monotony, time becomes slippery. A minute stretches, an hour disappears. You begin to recognize your crewmates not by their names, but by the sound of their breath, the rhythm of their rowing, the way they grunt at the same moment every morning. You are individuals, but also one machine. At night, if you are lucky, the ship anchors. If not, you row by torchlight. You drift into sleep, still rocking from the cadence, your dreams soaked with a splash of oars. And so, it goes, day after day. Row or rot. Segment 2. The Battle of Actium, Cleopatra, Antony, and the Sea. Let us now rise from the damp shadows of the oar deck, and ascend, gently, into a story told countless times, but rarely this way. Imagine yourself standing on the deck of a grand Roman warship, still wooden, still creaking, but painted, gilded, and adorned with banners that flutter in the Mediterranean wind. The year is 31 BCE. The sun is bright, and the sea lies calm. But this calm is only the surface. You are in the Ionian Sea, just off the western coast of Greece, near a small promontory known as Actium. Here, two immense fleets are poised to decide the fate of Rome, not just as a republic or an empire, but as an idea, On one side, Gaius Octavian, the adopted son of Julius Caesar, still young, politically shrewd, and calculating. His fleet, commanded by Agrippa, is seasoned, organized, and maneuverable. On the other side, Mark Antony, Caesar's former general, and once his closest friend. Now at odds with Rome, sailing beside Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, their ships are larger, heavier, more floating fortresses than sleek vessels of war. This is not a simple battle. This is theater on the sea, with thousands of lives caught between ancient grudges and fragile alliances. Imagine the buildup, the days before the clash, crews drilling in tight formation, oars tested, sails furled and unfurled, supplies sorted and rationed. The night before quiet, tense officers whispering in oil-lit cabins, rowers resting in uneasy shifts. And then, the morning comes. The Battle of Actium begins not with a trumpet, but with slow movement ships turning, angling for position. Octavian's fleet waits, refusing to be baited into the bay. Antony's larger ships attempt to draw them in, but the younger general holds the line. From your vantage point on the deck, the battle appears like a slow, measured dance. Ships circle, archers loose, volleys, ramming prows seek their mark, but most engagements are cautious, probing. The air smells of brine, burning oil, and wood. Antony's ships are powerful but sluggish. Octavian's, lighter and faster, begin to outflank them. The winds shift. Cleopatra's squadron stationed at the rear begins to move. Unexpectedly, her ships turn and flee, slipping through the battle line, sails catching wind. This is the moment most remember. Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, retreating. Was it betrayal, a planned escape, a desperate act? Historians still debate. But from the deck, there is only confusion. Signals are misread. Morale cracks. Antony, perhaps stunned, follows her. Some say he leaped into a small vessel and gave chase, abandoning the fight. Others claim he attempted to regroup but was overwhelmed. The battle continues, but the heart has left it. Octavian's forces press the advantage. One by one, Antony's remaining ships are boarded or burned. The sea is thick with smoke, not loud, not chaotic in the way we might imagine, but slow, methodical, and final. The defeat is not a moment, it is a tide, creeping and certain. In the days after, those who survive drift ashore or are taken prisoner. Antony and Cleopatra, reunited in Egypt, will not survive the year. Therein, like the battle, is slow and ceremonial, more tragedy than triumph. Octavian returns to Rome, not simply as victor, but as master of the known world. He becomes Augustus, the first emperor. The Republic fades quietly, like a warship slipping beneath the waves. And so, from the deck of a Roman vessel, you witness not just a battle, but the quiet turning of an age. Segment 3. Mysterious Naval Tactics. The Corvus and beyond. Let us now drift into the realm of practical and often forgotten. The Roman Navy, though not always praised for brilliance, was nonetheless built on centuries of clever adaptation, and nowhere is that clearer than in its naval tactics, some of which remain mysterious, even today. Tonight, we focus on a particularly curious invention. The word corvus means raven in Latin, but aboard a Roman warship, it had referred not to the bird, but to a boarding device. Picture a long, rotating plank-and-arrow bridge mounted on the bow of a Roman ship. At its tip, a heavy iron spike. It looks something like a beak or a claw, hence the name. It could be raised or lowered with pulleys, and when lowered onto an enemy ship, the spike would embed itself into the opposing deck, locking the two vessels together. This was Rome's solution to a fundamental problem. Its sailors were not natural sea. Unlike the Greeks or Carthaginians, whose sailors had grown up with the rhythms of the sea, the Romans came from the land. Their strength was infantry, formations, discipline. On land, they were nearly unmatched. At sea, they were learning, so they brought the land with them. The corvus allowed Roman soldiers to fight sea battles as if they were land battles. Once the bridge was dropped, Marines could rush across in tight formation, using shields and short swords. Suddenly, the ocean became just another battlefield. We know the corvus was used to great effect during the First Punic War, especially at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BCE. It helped secure critical victories against the more experienced Carthaginian navy. But curiously, it vanished. By the time of the later Punic Wars, there is little mention of it. Historians speculate. Was it too heavy? Did it make ships top-heavy and unstable in rough seas? Was it simply a temporary solution, too awkward for long-term use? The truth remains uncertain. Like so much of history, the corvus leaves behind more questions than answers. Beyond the corvus, Roman naval tactics remained conservative. They favored boarding over ramming. They emphasized order-tight formations, predictable movements, the discipline of the fleet over the chaos of individual brilliance. They studied their enemies, the Carthaginians, who had better sailors, the Greeks, who favored the trireme, and the elegant maneuver, known as the dikploso weaving attack, that could slip between enemy lines. Rome responded not with agility, but with sheer weight. Their later ships, the quinquiremes, were large and they relied on overwhelming force crashing through lines, pinning down smaller ships, absorbing losses like a wall absorbs a blow. And then, of course, there were the signal systems, flags in daylight, lanterns at night, horns, trumpets, and shouted commands. The Navy developed a language of signs, carefully rehearsed, to allow fleets to turn, split, regroup, or attack in unison. It was not elegant, but it was dependable. The Roman Navy was not built for glory. It was built for function, for control, and for endurance. So much of it now lies beneath the sea fragments of hulls, rusted weapons, lengths of rope turned to threads. But in the silence of archaeological dives, the shapes of these tactics still linger. You can almost see them, slow-moving ships, aligning in formation, a plank creaking into place, the dull thud of iron on timber. In an empire obsessed with land, the sea was an afterthought but never an oversight. Segment 4. Feasting with Admirals. Luxury on the command deck. Now, let us rise once more, this time not merely from the lower decks to the open air, but into a different world entirely. Imagine the very same ship, that same Roman war vessel, but instead of the endless rhythm of oars and the damp closeness of rowers' quarters, you find yourself on the command deck air. A Roman admiral stands wrapped in a crimson cloak, the symbol of command. His expression calm, his words few. Here, life moves at a different pace. The admiral is rarely hurried. His days begin not with the strike of a drum, but with reports and scrolls delivered by attendants who bow as they approach. He does not labor at the oar. He is the mind of the ship, not its muscle. And though a warship is no palace, for a Roman admiral, comfort followed where status allowed. On longer voyages, the stern of the ship might be fitted with a small tablinum, makeshift private chamber enclosed by canvas or wooden panels. Inside, you might find a cot or a cushioned bench, a folding table, perhaps a bronze lamp burning slowly. There might be writing tablets, maps laid across a box lid, and small figurines of gods or ancestors set carefully in niches for protection at sea. Meals for the admiral were, of course, quite different from the crew's, rough bread and water. In some fleets, especially during peacetime patrols or diplomatic voyages, cooks prepared full meals, lentils and herbs with olive oil, salted fish wrapped in fig leaves, honeyed dates or pressed cheese, and wine watered just enough to remain dignified. Not lavish by land-based standards, but generous. There may even have been dinner companions, fellow officers, ambassadors, or visiting dignitaries from allied These small gatherings, huddled under canvas as the sea breeze stirred their cloaks, offered quiet conversation. Topics ranged from military strategy to poetry, from weather omens to gossip from Rome. And here, on this upper deck, strategy was whispered while wind filled the sails. Ships were tracked, courses adjusted, decisions made that would affect thousands below. Admirals were not always career sailors. Many were political appointmentsmen who had never rowed a stroke or hauled a rope, but others were seasoned leaders, like Agrippa, Octavian's right hand, who blended intellect with pragmatism, bringing the full weight of Roman organization to the sea. Still, even they were vulnerable. Storms did not distinguish between commanders and slaves. A sudden gale could snap a mast in half. A leak unseen and unaddressed could sink even the best-led ship. And in battle, boarding meant every man, even the admiral, might draw his sword. But before those moments came, there was dinner. A quiet meal in the dusk, the sound of water slapping against the hull, the creak of sails overhead, the flicker of a torch reflected on polished bronze. Even at sea, the rhythm of Roman hierarchy held steady. From the rowers in darkness, to the officers in to the admiral at ease, seated by a map, sipping wine, and contemplating the wide, dark sea. Segment 5. Greek pirates versus Roman otter. Maritime enemies. As we continue our journey across the quiet waters of Roman naval history, we now shift our gaze to the enemy, not the grand fleets of rival empires, but a more elusive, persistent, and irritating threat. The pirates. Imagine the Mediterranean not is a peaceful sea, but as a vast, blue expanse teeming with uncertainty. In the centuries before and even during Rome's dominance, piracy was not simply a nuisance. It was a profession, a lifestyle, and for some, a necessity. Greek pirates, particularly those operating from the rugged coastlines of Cilicia and Crete, were notorious. Their ships were smaller than Roman galleys, lighter, faster, and more maneuverable. Built for raiding rather than battle, they would dart in from hidden coves, seize merchant vessels, and vanish into the mist before the nearest patrol ship could even break formation. To the Romans, these pirates represented disorganized movement, lawless, violence, uncollected taxes, but to many coastal communities, they were also traders, protectors, even folk heroes. Imagine sailing along the coast of Asia Minor in a Roman merchant ship. You carry amphorae of wine and jars of olives, but on the horizon, dark sails, a flash of oars, a shout, By the time the watchman calls alarm, the pirate vessel is already beside you. There is no battle, only surrender. The Romans attempted to patrol these waters, but for centuries their efforts were scattered. The Mediterranean was vast. The pirates were patient. For every pirate ship caught or sunk, 2 more seemed to appear in its place. The situation grew so dire that, in 67 BCE, the Roman Senate granted extraordinary powers to one man named Pompeius Magnus Pompey the Great. His mission was clear: cleanse the seas. With sweeping authority, Pompey divided the Mediterranean into sectors, assigning fleets and commanders to each. It was a methodical campaign, not of glory, but of logistics. Ports were blocked, pirate havens were scouted, bases on the cliffs of Cilicia were stormed, and slowly, the waters quieted. Yet even then, piracy never truly disappeared. It adapted. Pirates became smugglers. Smugglers became the sea, after all, resists control. Its inlets, caves, and shifting currents offered endless opportunities for those willing to risk capture. To the Roman navy, pirates were not heroic or romantic. They were a disruption to the delicate machine of empire. Grain could not flow freely from Egypt. Silver could not travel safely from Spain. Troops and orders could not move without security at sea. So the navy adapted. Ships began to patrol more frequently. Intelligence networks informal though they were tracked known captains. Ports demanded more documentation. Merchants hired guards. And still, the occasional ship vanished. A small coastal town might wake to find its harbor raided, its warehouses emptied under the cover of night. Roman order, always ambitious, never absolute. And so, between the stately galleys of the empire and the swift skiffs of the pirate, there remained a quiet, continuous tension, unresolved, but never forgotten. Segment 6. Naval Training Drills. Endless discipline at sea. Let's now turn inward to the daily rituals and repetitions that shaped the Roman navy. Not the drama of battle, nor the thrill of exploration, but the slow, deliberate art of preparation. Imagine again that you are on board a Roman warship, not during war, but during the long stretches in between those quiet weeks or months when the ship was docked or patrolling peaceful waters. Even then, idleness was not permitted. For the Roman navy, discipline was everything. Training began early in the day. Before the sun crested the horizon, officers were already assembling the crew. Exercises were not optional. They were part of the rhythm of life at sea. Repetition was the method. Repetition was the goal. The rowers, whether free citizens, conscripts, or slaves, were drilled endlessly in sync. One might imagine rowing as a purely physical act, but to the Roman navy, it was a matter of timing, of order, row, pause, row. This cadence was reinforced not only with voice commands, but with instruments, drums, flutes, and horns. The sound was not meant to inspire, it was meant to guide. In calm waters, entire days might be spent practicing maneuver drills, advancing in formation, executing tight turns, sudden reversals. Ships would be arranged in lines or crescents, changing positions again and again, until every man knew his role without hesitation. On land, the Marines, the armed soldiers aboard each vessel, practiced as well. Their weapons were checked, sharpened, and replaced. Their footwork was refined. Formation drills were common. How to board, how to defend the deck, how to repel invaders. Shields up, swords drawn, advanced hold. Officers trained in the use of signaling devices, colored flags for daytime, and lantern patterns for night. A wrong signal could mean disaster, so every gesture, every light, had to be clear and deliberate. Rope work, too, was an essential part of training. Young sailors learned how to coil, tie, and secure the endless ropes that held the ship together. Knots were practiced until muscle memory took over. A single frayed line could prove catastrophic during a storm. Even swimming, though not emphasized, was sometimes taught, especially to those in command. Rowers, locked in their places, often had no chance to escape a sinking ship. But officers, stationed above, were expected to survive if they could. And then, there were the inspections. A Roman ship was a microcosm of the empire. It had its own hierarchy, its own routines. The trierarch, or ship's commander, would walk the deck daily, checking for slackness, for disrepair, for signs of disobedience or disorder. Punishments were rarely harsh but always present. Training, in the Roman mindset, was not about glory, it was about predictability. A well-trained ship could be trusted to perform the same way every time. And that, to a Roman admiral, was worth more than any burst of courage or moment of genius. And so, the drills continued. Hour after hour, day after day. No cheers, no applause, just the soft slap of oars into water, the creak of timber, the beat of the drum, the rhythm of routine. In that endless repetition, there was comfort, and in that comfort, control. Segment 7, Roman Shipbuilding. Slow, tedious, and ingenious. Let us leave the sea for a moment and step onto dry land into a shipyard. It is early morning, and the scent of fresh-cut timber mingles with the salt carried inland by the breeze. You are standing in a Roman Navalia military dock. Around you, the slow, deliberate art of shipbuilding unfolds. Unlike the bustling marketplaces or roaring forums of Rome, this is a place of quiet precision. There is no rush. A warship cannot be forced into being. It must be coaxed assembled plank by plank, each measured and fitted, then shaped with iron tools worn smooth from use. The Romans, practical as ever, borrowed and refined techniques from others, especially the Greeks and Phoenicians. Early in their naval endeavors, they famously reversed. But Roman efficiency did not mean speed. A single ship could take months to build. Dozens of men worked in teams: carpenters, blacksmiths, sailmakers, rope weavers, each contributing their part to the slow birth of a vessel. The process began with the keel, the long spine of the ship. From there, the ribs curved supports made of seasoned oak or pine were fitted like the skeleton of a sleeping creature. Over these, planks were laid edge to edge in a method called shell-first construction, then sealed with pitch and caulked with fibrous material to keep water at bay. The materials themselves were a matter of empire. Wood came from forests in Gaul or Illyricum, linen for sails from Egypt, pitch from the Black Sea region. Every warship was a quiet symbol of Rome's reach, assembled from parts scattered across the world, it claimed. Above the hull, the decks were added, layered with hatches and benches. Holes were cut for oars, and supports carved for the mast. The prow might bear a carved figure head, readily decorative, but always symbolic. A boar's head for strength, an eagle for Rome. Sometimes nothing at all. The raw, angled timber, pointed like a spear toward the sea. Perhaps most important was the rostrum, the bronze or iron-sheathed ram at the ship's front. This was not merely a weapon, but a statement. To ram another ship required speed, courage, and precision. It was both a tactical tool and a declaration of confidence. The shipbuilders worked slowly. There were no engines, no machines, only hands, levers, pulleys, and time. They paused often to measure, to adjust, to wait for wood to dry, or to set under the sun. Mistakes were costly. A ship improperly balanced might list forever. A poorly joined hull could crack under stress, and once a ship was launched, repairs were difficult and often temporary. The sea, after all, forgives little. When finished, the ship was hauled toward the water on greased logs. Men shouted in rhythm as they pulled it forward. There was no ceremonious, the creaking of timber, the slow descent into the sea. And then, it floated. A new vessel, a new link in the Roman war machine. It would be fitted with oars, a mast, sails, and ropes. Rowers would come aboard, followed by marines. The ship would be named, often after a virtue. Victus, Fortitudo, Victoria. And then, it would begin its life not in glory, but in labor. Every ship bore the weight of countless hours, countless hands, countless silent decisions made in sawdust and sun. And in that stillness, the Navy took form. Segment 8, Daily Rations and Illnesses at Sea. Now that the ship has taken form and been launched, let us return to life aboard. Not the thrill of movement, nor the storm of battle, but the slow routine of survival. For aboard a Roman warship, life was measured not just in distance or orders, but in meals and maladies. Imagine again that you are a rower or a your world is confined to wood and water. You rise with the sun, or before it, and soon after, you eat. But what do you eat? The daily ration was simple. For most aboard, it began with a portion of pulza, thick porridge made of ground grain. Barley was common, though sometimes spelt or wheat, depending on the region and season. This porridge was filling but plain, sometimes flavored with salt, vinegar, or crushed herbs if they were available. Bread was issued as well, dense, hard, and baked for longevity, sometimes so hard, in fact, that it was soaked in water or wine to be edible. There were no ovens on board. Everything had to be preserved, and freshness was fleeting. Protein came from salted meat or dried fish, typically preserved with heavy salting or smoking. These rations could last weeks, but often tasted exactly as they looked: rough, chewy, and overwhelmingly salty. Olives, cheese, and legumes might supplement the meal, depending on the ship's mission, funding, and access to supplies. On longer voyages, rations grew monotonous. Spoilage was common, especially in the Mediterranean heat. Water, too, was a concern. Carried in clay amphorae or wooden barrels, it often grew stale or developed a film. To counter this, it was frequently mixed with vinegar, creating a drink called This sour concoction quenched thirst, killed some bacteria, and made questionable water slightly more palatable. For officers, meals were more varied. A private stock of wine, pickled vegetables, honey, or even fruits might be brought aboard. But for most, the routine never changed. And when the food didn't come, ships could be delayed by weather, lost from their fleets, or stranded due to damage. In these times, rations were reduced. Hunger sharpened tempers. Discipline became harder to maintain. Malnutrition, slow and quiet, took root, and with it came illness. The most common afflictions were simple but relentless. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, took its toll over long voyages. Its effects were slow, swollen gums, fatigue, joint pain. For centuries, its cause remained a mystery. There was also unclean water, close quarters, and minimal sanitation led to stomach ailments that spread quickly. A single contaminated barrel could leave dozens ill. Skin infections were common. Constant exposure to salt water and sun, followed by damp nights and friction from clothing, created perfect conditions for sores and rashes. The rowers, sitting for hours, developed raw wounds on their hands, backs, and legs. Without proper treatment, these wounds could become infected. There were no bandages in surplus, no antibiotics in surplus, vinegar, and hope. Sleep deprivation weakened the immune system. On longer missions, shifts were rotated at all hours. In combat situations, rest might be limited to brief moments at anchor, or even stolen minutes at the fevers, chills, nausea. These became background noise. To survive, one simply endured. And yet, despite it all, most endured. The human body and the human spirit adapted. The men aboard knew the rhythm of their ships, the weight of their tasks, the sound of illness, and the smell of cooked grain long before it arrived. There was comfort in the routine. Even sickness followed its pattern. And above all, there was duty. To Rome, to the ship, to the slow, creaking march of the empire across the water. Segment 9. Religious rituals of sailors and captains. Let us now turn our attention away from the physical world of rope and rations and drift, gently, into the spiritual lives of those who lived and died at sea. For the Romans, as for many ancient peoples, the sea was not merely a place. It was a force capricious, mysterious, and alive with unseen powers. Sailors did not venture onto its surface without first paying their respects. Rituals, offerings, and small gestures of faith accompanied nearly every voyage, from the grandest campaigns to the quietest patrols. Imagine the early morning before a ship's departure. The air is cool, and the docks are busy. Amid the activity, a small altar is prepared, sometimes just a stone, or a flat piece of wood set with a bowl of salt and a few twigs of laurel. The primary deity of seafarers was Neptune, god of the sea, storms, and earthquakes. Before departure, a libation of wine or oil might be poured into the water, accompanied by a whispered prayer for calm seas and swift passage. Captains often led these rites, solemnly and without flourish. But Neptune was not alone. Portunus, the god of harbors and gateways, was invoked when entering or leaving a port. Fortuna, goddess of luck, was never far from the thoughts of sailors, particularly those embarking on dangerous routes. And Mercury, patron of travelers and merchants, received prayers from those ferrying cargo or messages. Each ship had its own customs. Some carried protective charms, carved figurines of deities, small pouches of herbs, or tokens inscribed with Latin invocations. Others marked the prow with symbols meant to ward off bad omens, eyes, painted on either side. For instance, to see and avoid hidden dangers. Before battle, religious rituals intensified. Animals, often small, such as birds or goats, might be sacrificed at the dockside. Augurs were consulted to read the flights of birds or the patterns in their entrails. A favorable reading could embolden a fleet. An ill omen might delay a launch or alter a course. Rowers, often drawn from many regions of the empire, brought their own beliefs. From Egypt, they brought prayers to Isis, protector of sailors. From the east, the cult of Mithras might be quietly practiced in shadows below deck. In this, the Roman navy was a mosaic of quiet faiths coexisting, overlapping, but never absent. Even the design of ships reflected spiritual thinking. The rostrum, the metal prow used for ramming, was not only a weapon, but often decorated with symbols of divine protection. The stern post, curved and elegant, was sometimes topped with a tutela guardian figurine. And when disaster struck, when a storm hit, or a ship was lost, rituals followed. Those who survived might cast offerings into the sea in memory of the dead. Wreaths, coins, or fragments of clothing. At times, they would build temporary altars on shore, where the names of the lost were spoken aloud, their spirits given proper recognition. Even the timing of voyages was governed by religious calendars. Certain days were considered unlucky to sail, marked in red ink on military logs. During festivals like the Lemuria, when restless spirits were believed to walk among the living, ships remained in harbor. For a people as pragmatic as the Romans, religion remained deeply woven into daily function. It was not questioned nor explained. It simply was. And so, each voyage, no matter how brief, was framed by ritual. A blessing before departure. A prayer at sunrise. A token fingered in the dark. In the vast silence of the open sea, faith filled the space between the waves. Segment 10. Naval Intelligence and the Roman Communication Web. From the realm of prayer and mystery, let us now return to the practical, yet no less fascinated, into the realm of knowledge, of messages, of signals, quietly passed from ship to ship and port to port. For an empire so vast, the Roman communication network was essential. It was a kind of silent scaffolding that held the navy and the empire. Imagine a fleet stationed off the coast of Hispania, another patrolling near Crete, a third docked at Alexandria. Months might pass before orders arrived, if they arrived at all, and so the Roman Navy developed its own methods of staying informed and of informing others. It began with signal systems at sea. During daylight, ships used colored flags, each with specific meanings. A blue flag might mean regroup. Red, prepare for battle. Green, hold, position. These systems were simple, but effective, especially in clear weather. At night, the Navy relied on lantern codes. Officers were trained to raise specific combinations, one lantern above, two to the side, for example, to signal direction changes, warnings, or to identify friend from foe. The rhythm of these signals, much like Morse code centuries later, had to be memorized. But even more fascinating was the broader Roman intelligence and dispatch system, known as the coziest. This was the official courier network of the empire, established by Augustus himself. It allowed for messages, military orders, and diplomatic documents to travel astonishing distances with surprising speed. Naval commanders, stationed far from Rome, often sent reports by fast dispatch boats-like vessels that carried only messengers and messages. These were the express couriers of the sea, cutting across open waters while heavier fleets remained at anchor. Upon reaching land, the messages would pass into the cursus publicus system. At each station, fresh horses and riders waited. Roads were marked with milestones. Inns, called mutations, provided food and shelter for the couriers. The system could deliver news from the provinces to Rome in a matter of days, weeks, at most. And what did these messages contain? Fleet positions, reports of pirate sightings, requests for grain, updates on foreign ports, weather warnings, requisition orders for repairs, lists of lost men, recommendations for promotion or warnings of insubordination. Each scrap of parchment or wax tablet, tied carefully in linen or sealed in clay, represented a thread in the vast web of Roman authority. There were also covert forms of intelligence. Spies, though not formally institutionalized, did exist. Informants in coastal towns might pass word of pirate gatherings. Traders reported unusual ship movements. Foreign captains were sometimes questioned quietly over shared wine and olives. Even intercepted messages played a role. Roman ships, if they captured an enemy vessel, would search its cargo, not just for goods but for information. Maps, coded letters, even whispered rumors gathered from captured crew could be useful. And when commanders needed to move without alerting enemies, false signals were sometimes used. A decoy fleet might raise the wrong flags. Messages might be intentionally delayed or routed through false ports. The system was not perfect. Whether human error and miscommunication often played their part, but in an age without radios, without satellites, and without instantaneous transmission, it was remarkable. In this quiet network of couriers, codes, and lanterns, the Roman Navy could function not blindly, but with purpose. From the cliffs of Britannia to the markets of Alexandria, information flowed like a slow tide, connecting every ship, every commander, every decision into a single, deliberate whole. Segment 11. What happened to the lost fleets? Now, let us turn our attention to what is no longer there. So much of the Roman Navy remains in fragments, rusted anchors, buried beneath coral, broken timbers scattered along the seafloor, inscriptions half-worn by waves. The empire once commanded hundreds of ships, and yet, few remain. What happened to them? The sea, as always, is both a preserver and a destroyer. Let us explore the quiet, often overlooked end of these floating machines of empire. Some Roman fleets were simply decommissioned. As borders shifted and threats diminished in certain provinces, fleets were gradually downsized. Ships that once patrolled the Black Sea or the Atlantic coast were pulled ashore, dismantled, and their timber became part of granaries or fishing piers. Their metal fittings were melted and forged into new tools. Other fleets were absorbed into civilian use. Once a region was pacified, the military vessels stationed there might be converted into merchant ships or ferries. Their oars were removed. The marines were discharged. The decks were broadened to hold amphorae of wine or grain instead of soldiers. But not all endings were so gentle. Many Roman ships simply sank taken, not by battle, but by weather. A sudden squall in the age, a storm rolling in from the Libyan coast, a rogue wave near the Aegean islands. Roman ships, particularly the larger ones, were not well suited for high seas or unpredictable winds. Without modern forecasting, even experienced admirals could be caught off guard. In these moments, there was little recourse. The sail might be lowered, the oars retracted, anchors thrown, none of it guaranteed survival. The sea would lift and crack the hull, or simply swallow it whole. The men who perished left few traces. Life vests did not exist. Wreckage drifted for a time before being claimed by tide and salt. Some fleets vanished in warfare. Take, for example, the Battle of Naulochus in 36 BCE, where Agrippa, once again, defeated Sextus Pompey. Over 300 ships were involved. When it ended, the sea was littered with burning vessels. Some were salvaged, others abandoned, and many disappeared beneath the waves, their fate unrecorded. Even more intriguing are the fleets that disappeared from history without battle or storm. These are not the ones lost in a single day, but the ones that faded quietly. Consider the Classis Britannica, the British fleet, once vital for controlling the Channel and ferrying troops to and from the island of Bat. After the Roman withdrawal in the early 5th century, it seemingly dissolved. No epic final battle, no last stand, just silent. Archaeologists have found traces styles stamped with fleet insignias, fragments of shipyards near Dover and below, but the ships themselves are gone. Possibly dismantled by locals, possibly left to rot. In rare cases, ships were ceremonially sunk. There is some evidence, though limited, that certain vessels, particularly those connected to imperial processions or religious rites, might have been deliberately consigned to the sea as offerings. The idea that a ship might serve one final symbolic journey beneath the waves. And then there are the myths. Stories of entire fleets lost in fog. Ships seen disappearing into sea caves. Rumors of ghost ships drifting with no crew. These tales, recorded in later medieval sources or whispered among coastal peoples, are likely embellishments, but they reflect a truth that the sea takes and does not return. Today, underwater archaeology works slowly to uncover what remains. The keel of a quinquereme buried off Sicily, bronze nails blackened by time, a set of Roman amphorae nestled like eggs at the bottom of a sunken cargo ship. Each discovery is a quiet resurrection, and yet, for every ship found, dozens remain missing, their names unrecorded. Their journeys ended not with glory, but with silence. The fleets of Rome, once vast, organized, and powerful, now rest in scattered fragments. And in that stillness, the sea keeps its secrets. Segment 12, Entertainment and Storytelling on Long Voyage. Let us now shift into one of the quietest, most human aspects of naval life. How time was passed when the sails were stilled and the oars rested in their locks. Life aboard a Roman warship was defined by routine drills, rations, repairs, and silence. But even within this world of endless repetition, there were moments, brief but vital, when the men were free to think, speak, and find fragments of comfort. In those hours, it was not weapons nor strategy that ruled, but stories. Entertainment on board a Roman ship was, above all else, modest. There were no theaters at sea, no elaborate games. The deck was too narrow, the voyage too serious. But the mind, even in hardship, seeks relief. Storytelling became the primary form of escape. Picture a group of rowers gathered during a pause-sitting, shoulder to shoulder, backs pressed against the curved hull, the air heavy with salt and sweat. One man, perhaps older, clears his throat. Others fall quiet, half listening as he begins to speak. He tells of home, of wild boars in the forests of Gaul, of spirits seen at night in the hills outside Syracuse, of a merchant who swore he once saw Neptune rise from the sea with burning eyes. These stories were not always true. That was not the point. They were shared as a comfort, as a tether to something beyond the oars and the endless blue horizon. Legends were popular. Tales of Hercules, of Odysseus, of Aeneas, myths familiar to all but shaped anew with each telling. A Gaul might speak of his river gods, a Syrian might recount temple legends, an Egyptian might describe the weighing of the heart by Anubis in the halls of the dead. There were also practical stories, less glorious, but useful. Accounts of narrow escapes from storms, cautionary tales of sailors who ignored omens and met ruin. Lessons were folded into narrative, like seeds into earth. Music, too, was present, though limited. A flute carved from bone, a lyre with a few strings, a rhythm tapped quietly on a hull plank. Sometimes a chant soft, rhythmic, in time with the sea, a call and response to pass the time while waiting for orders or while eating. Some rowers sang old marching songs. Others made new ones, simple rhymes that mocked their officers or recounted a memorable voyage. Humor, even if dry or dark, was a valuable currency aboard. For officers and literate sailors, there were scrolls and wax tablets. A few brought works of poetry. Virgil, Horace Ovid. Reading aloud was rare on deck, but more common in calmer moments ashore. A commander might recite a few lines while pacing near the stern, his voice carried gently by the sea wind. And then, there was dreaming. Many found solace in looking out across the water and imagining another life. A farm in the countryside, a family by the fire, a return to the land. These quiet visions, never spoken aloud, were a form of story too, an internal narrative that softened the edges of discipline. At night, after the shift changed and the ship rocked gently in its moorings, men whispered stories to one another under their breath. Sometimes bawdy, sometimes frightening, sometimes sad. They spoke of women left behind, of children they had never met, of comrades lost in battles long past. In these stories, the ship became more than wooden sail. It became a floating village, a shared space of memory, fear, and fragile hope. And while the empire above concerned itself with glory, conquest, and order, down here, beneath the stars, stories were enough. Segment 13. Women in the Roman Navy. Presence or absence? Let us now pause and consider a question often left unasked in the annals of maritime history. Where were the women? Did they exist in the world of Roman naval life? Or were they wholly absent, forgotten, erased by the roar of wind and the splash of oars? The answer, as with much of Roman history, is neither simple nor absolute. Officially, women were not part of the Roman Navy. They were not enlisted as sailors, rowers, or marines. The Navy, like the legions, was a male domain constructed by law, custom, and the rhythms of empire to exclude women from its formal ranks. But that does not mean they were absent. Imagine the naval port towns, places like Misenum and Ravenna, where fleets were stationed for months or years. These towns grew into bustling communities, filled not only with soldiers and shipwrights, but with families, merchants, and workers. Here, women played essential roles, even if not recorded in naval rosters. Some were wives and partners of officers or civilian staff. Roman naval officers, especially those with permanent postings, often lived in houses near the docks. Their families accompanied them, and their wives managed the household, cared for children, and sometimes participated in the social and religious life of the base. Others were innkeepers, merchants, midwives, and laundresses, working within the bustling economy that formed wherever ships came and went. They sold bread, mended sails, offered prayers at local temples, and tended the wounded when ships limped back into port. Then there were the camp followers, a term often misunderstood. These were not only women engaged in informal relationships with sailors, but also tradespeople and servants who followed fleets from port to port, often aboard supply ships. Some may have been mothers or daughters of sailors, unofficial passengers sharing the long journey in cramped quarters below deck. Though rare, historical anecdotes and inscriptions suggest the presence of women aboard ships, particularly in non-combat roles. Greek and Roman sources mention priestesses accompanying processional vessels. In Egypt, papyri reference women aboard grain transports during the Roman era, though whether these were imperial navy ships or merchant vessels under naval protection remains uncertain. And in matters of faith, women's presence was sometimes vital. Temples to seek gods in coastal cities often featured priestesses, and festivals related to naval protection such as the Portionalia or Neptunalia included women among their Some ships may have carried small effigies or offerings prepared by female relatives before setting sail, tokens of protection woven with care and quiet hope. There is also evidence, though limited and largely anecdotal, of disguised women joining military life. While this is more frequently associated with the legions, some historians speculate that similar cases may have occurred in the Navy, women passing as young men to join a crew. Hidden among hundreds, and in memory, women remained ever present. Sailors carved the names of mothers, wives, and daughters into the beams of their cabins. Letters, if they could write, were often addressed not to officers or friends, but to loved ones at home. The thought of women, even in absence, shaped the emotional world aboard every ship. So while the Roman Navy itself may have been a male institution, the lives surrounding it, the ports, the prayers, the wait and were filled with women. Their roles, though quiet and often unrecorded, were foundational. Like the wind behind the sail, they moved the ship forward, even if no one ever saw them standing on deck. Segment 14. The decline of the Roman Navy. Rust, rot, and reassignment. As we near the end of our journey, let us reflect not on glory, but on decay. Not on the clash of fleets, but on the quiet unraveling of an empire's maritime strength. The Roman Navy, like all institutions under the empire's long shadow, did not fall in a single day. It did not burn in some final, tragic sea battle, nor sink beneath a single storm. Its decline was slow, unremarkable, and almost unnoticed. Just as it had once quietly held the empire together, so too did it quietly fade. By the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, the threats faced by Rome were no longer focused on the sea. The frontiers of the empire had shifted. Enemies came, not in fleets from across the water, but in tribes and armies pressing against the Danube and the Rhine. The urgency of naval dominance faded. The Mediterranean, once called Mare Nostrum or sea, had become less central to Rome's survival. Resources dwindled. Ships aged. Maintenance was deferred, then forgotten. Where once every fleet had a well-funded navalia, by the later empire, these dockyards had fallen into neglect. Tools rusted, ropes frayed, hulls cracked and were patched rather than replaced. And with the Navy's diminishing role came reassignment. Ships were no longer built to fight piracy or rival fleets. Instead, they were adapted to carry troops quickly along coasts, or to ferry supplies to struggling garrisons. The sleek triremes and quinquiremes gave way to broad utilitarian trains, and built for function rather than force. The men who once trained for boarding actions now spent their days loading grain, unloading amphorae, or shuttling bureaucrats from island to island. Even the great fleets, like the Classis Britannica or Classis Alexandrina, saw their numbers dwindle. Some were disbanded altogether, Others, still named on the rolls, existed mostly on paper. The rise of new naval powers also played a role. By the late Empire, the Vandals had developed their own formidable fleet from North Africa. In 455 CE, they sacked Rome not over land, but by sea. Ironically, the same maritime expertise Rome had once wielded with such confidence now worked against her. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium, maintained a stronger navy for a time. They would later develop Greek fire, a terrifying incendiary weapon used at sea. But that was a different world, a different Rome. In the West, the decline was final. Ships were no longer symbols of strength, but relics of a different age. Some were repurposed as storage hulks, others were stripped for timber, and many simply rotted in place, their hulls half submerged in the shallows of forgotten ports. No grand ceremonies marked their end, just the slow encroachment of salt and moss. What had once been an intricate machine of logistics, warfare, and ritual became bit by bit, and yet echoes remained. Fishermen still sailed past the old docks, casting lines where galleys once launched. Children played atop stones once used to anchor great chains. In the monasteries of the early medieval world, scribes copied faded texts about fleet compositions and naval routes they would never see. And centuries later, when new empires rose and rediscovered the seas, they would find remnants of this Roman maritime ghost shipwrecks. Decline is not always dramatic. Sometimes, it comes like fog. Soft, quiet, unresisted. Segment 15. The Legacy of Rome's Forgotten Sailors. And so we arrive at the final leg of our voyage, not to recount battles or rebuild fleets, but to reflect on those who once manned them, the tens of thousands of forgotten sailors whose names are lost, but whose labors helped hold an empire together. They did not write history. They did not carve their stories into marble or commission frescoes of their deeds. Their legacy is quieter than that etched not in stone, but in the slow shaping of ports, routes, and cultures connected by water. Who were they? They were rowers from Gaul, conscripted in youth, hardened by the Oar and the sun, navigators from Syria, skilled in reading stars and coastal winds, marines from North Africa who boarded enemy ships with curved swords and simple tunics, men from the Balkans, from Asia Minor, from Egypt and Hispaniola, from the far corners of a vast empire, and united not by identity, but by purpose. They served not for glory, but for grain, for steady pay, for the chance of a pension, for duty, and sometimes, simply because they had no choice. Their ships left few they carried no cargoes of gold or rare spices. No precious art, they bore supplies, orders, men, and silence. And yet, their work was essential. It was they who ferried legions across the Aegean to suppress rebellion. They who shadowed merchant convoys along pirate-infested shores. They who brought supplies to hungry cities, escorted diplomats through contested waters, and mapped coastlines no one else dared touch. Their legacy is also geographical. Roman naval infrastructure shaped the Mediterranean in ways that linger today. Many of the harbors they dredged, the seawalls they built, the shipping lanes they maintained, became the foundation for medieval and even modern ports. Cities like Ravenna, Ostia, Alexandria, and Cartagena still carry traces of their naval pasts. Their discipline influenced future navies. The organizational structure of Roman fleets complete with command support crews, logistical branches, and port authorities provided an early model for military navies in Europe and the Middle East. In small ways, they entered language. The Latin term, novus ship endures, in dozens of tongues. Words like navy, navigation, navigate, all drift downstream from Roman waters. But perhaps their most human legacy is this. They endured, not with fame, not with monuments, but with steady labor, day after day, or after oar, mile after mile across, waters both calm and cruel. They rose with the sun. They followed orders. They feared storms. They missed home. They waited for letters that sometimes never came. And they rowed. Many were buried at sea. A few were commemorated with simple grave markers, weathered stones that speak only of names, ranks, and perhaps a brief line of remembrance. But most simply disappeared into the tide of time, as nameless as the waves they once crossed. And still, the sea remembers. In the depths off Sicily, in the shallows near Marseille, in the salt-bleached ruins of old docks, you can feel the shadow of their presence. Not loud, not heroic, but steady. And in that steadiness, in that rhythm of rowing and routine, of salt and sun and silence, they left a mark more enduring than many emperors. They kept the empire afloat, closing, drifting into the present. And now, as we drift back from the past into the gentle calm of the present, perhaps you feel something of their rhythm, the quiet discipline, the long patience, the steady hand against the endless sea. The Roman navy, once vast and essential, now lies mostly beneath the waves. But its echoes remain in ports, in languages, in stories half remembered, and in the quiet dignity of work well done and soon forgotten. As you rest, let your thoughts float gently with them. across still waters, past ancient shores, toward dreams, soft as the night itself. Sleep well.